On their own, the note effects aren't all that interesting, but when you start to combine them together, you really start to see where the power lies, especially with some of the new ones. So we'll go through a couple of quick examples. Whenever you're working with note effects, I'd always encourage you to have a second instrument track open and then choose the input to come from that instrument that has the note effects and choose the last thing in the chain, in this case the diatonic transposer, to make sure that after we record something in, we can actually then see the results and see the effect that this is having. That's probably the best way to go about doing this. All right, so let's start with the multi-note. All right, the multi-note allows you to stack notes on top of each other. So right now we just have whatever we click, that's 0. So if I hit a C, it's giving me the C. The note latch is going to hold a note indefinitely or until I hit stop. And this is useful for playing like chord sequences, so I don't have to worry about getting the timing just right in terms of when I let go of one and press another. I can go. So if you are playing out something like that with chords, this is a great way to maybe go about it if you're not as comfortable on the keyboard. So what I can do with this multi-note is I can set up a chord. So let's set up like as our bass here. What we're really doing is we're setting up a minor chord in first inversion, but we can think of this as A minor. So if we start from C, A minor first inversion, C, E, A. So what is the distance from C to E? It's 1, 2, 3, 4 semitones. So I can turn that on here. You can see we can then also set the relative velocity level. So depending on what velocity is mapped to in the instrument, that could have a whole host of different applications, right? And again, it's very difficult to control, especially for us mere mortals. Difficult for me, at least, if I'm playing chords, to be thinking about, oh, okay, I want to make sure that I'm hitting the E a lot harder or a lot softer than the C and the A. I can't do that personally. I know some people can. All right, but let's go ahead and finish this out. So from C to A, the distance there is 1, 2, 3, 4, 5, 6, 7, 8, 9. So with this next one, we want it to be a 9. And I'm sure people are going to create a bunch of presets with all sorts of different chords, and that will be useful when that's done. So now we've created a basic chord. So it's a minor chord in first inversion, or is it? All right, as of right now, it would be no matter where I play, and that's because I've turned off the diatonic transposer, so we can hear how this works. So that would be the C minor in first inversion. And that's going to be universal, and it sounds really pretty and it works, but is that going to snap everything into key? No, absolutely not. If we're playing C minor, that's not going to have, it has an E flat in it, right? So that's not going to work. We need to make sure that if we're working in C major, that we constrain those notes, and that's what the diatonic transposer would be used for. So now we could actually play any note that we want to play, and it will snap some things to different locations, but it's going to keep us in C major, keep us playing chords, and it can be a really cool and interesting effect. So we're now keeping everything in C major. And we can watch and see exactly how this is working here. I'm going to just record something in very quickly. All right, and now what we can do is we can take this one, we can set this to record, and because it's getting us from the diatonic transposer, we're going to be able to see exactly what's been generated. Let me just make sure this first one's coming and it's going to be picked up. It looks like it will. That's going to hold out indefinitely. So we can see exactly what all of these note effects have done. And if we compress this down, you can see that it has constrained everything into C major based on the notes that I've played up here. So you can see I actually played like a D sharp for the third one, and we can see what that has created in terms of a chord. It gave you an E, a G, and a C. So I'm not going to go any further at this time. Just wanted to show you some of these new note effects, and we'll be going into more depth on these later on. Note length comes in handy when you know what you want the duration for the final note to be. So let's say I want to play something in 16th notes or in 8th notes, but at the end, I want it to be a quarter note. All right, I can play like this. And I'm just tapping these keys and it's basically playing legato. And then when I stop, it's going to play like a quarter note at the end. And this is very useful. This is something you may not be very good at doing on the keyboard on your own, but now you can focus more on the notes that you're trying to hit and not necessarily on the duration. We also then have a note echo that we can include in here. And it is kind of important that you set the duration on the echo to be at least as long as what you put on the note length. Otherwise, it kind of has some problems. And you can see I've added a little bit of velocity sensitivity, and then in velocity here I've turned things down to make sure that the repeat is going to be quieter. And that might be a little bit too extreme. You can set your number of repetitions here. So this is going to sound pretty cool in the actual passage. So let's actually duplicate this, and then we'll kind of record something, and we'll use the second one, and then we'll see what exactly gets outputted here. All right, so let's just record something in here quickly and then see what it's going to output. And so we can actually look in here again and see the way I'm playing. I'm just barely even tapping these things. But now when we create that instrument track and we take a look at what we've gotten, it's going to be pretty cool. Let's just make sure we go all the way to the end here on note echo. And I'll go ahead and just record this in. Let's take a look at it. Cool. So if we go in and we look, we can see that note echo that's been produced here. Obviously, I believe this bass sound is just a mono sound, so we're kind of in the clear in that we don't have anything overlapping, but this is what ends up being generated. So you can see the velocity discrepancy with that second hit because we had that set up inside the instrument. You have to be kind of careful though, because here it's putting the velocity all the way to 0 because this is being scaled. So I definitely still put way too much by saying -19. I probably should have gone in here and had, like -5, and then you may have actually gone something that was a little bit nicer. You can also go in here and do some random stuff with the timing if you want to throw those off a little bit. That may be cool, but for a bass line like this is probably, one at least application of using the note length and the note echo. So the last thing we'll look at here is the note harmonizer. And so what this does is it pretty much means that I can play just like a static chord, any chord. And as long as I tell this what key the source is in or what key my song is in, and I give it the source, in this case we're using the chords from up here in the String King, it will put it into tune. And so when you combine this with the arpeggiator, very, very powerful. All right, so I'm going to play some notes that have nothing to do with C major right now, and then we'll export it and see what it comes up with. So assuming we've done everything right here, let's just mute the bass because it's going to be annoying. You can see that nothing I've played is in C major. All right. And what we're going to do is we're now just going to go in here and kind of manually adjust these. And then of course what we can do is check and see what exactly has been output by this. So let's go and add our instrument track. And again, we're going to choose the input in this case from the distorted arp triplets, and we'll go with the note harmonizer, turn record on, and check it out. So in this case, it's kind of interesting. It has given us a couple of sharps, but that's okay. I mean, that's not to be like unexpected. You can get away with that. It doesn't have to keep it necessarily in C major. If we need to keep it in C major, we could obviously go on here and we could put on the transposer at the end as well after the harmonizer source. So we can go and grab the diatonic transposer here and now keep it constrained into C major, and we can listen to and see what that's going to do. All right, here we go. One more time. You always have to click 8 things in order to get this to work. So that sounds pretty good, and we can check it out now and see that, yeah, it has constrained everything into C major. And so this is how you can use these note effects, and you don't have to have any knowledge of theory. You don't even have to be able to like play the keyboard, and you can very quickly lock everything into key and come up with some pretty quick and simple down and dirty results. And really my recommendation would be, once you get this, obviously experiment with it further and throw some other notes in, see what fits. But this is a great place to get started if you want something that's going to be very exact from which to then, you know, maybe experiment and go further with. With the exception of 2 of the instruments, as far as I can tell, there haven't been any updates to any of the old devices. There's no new features, there's no new sounds. But one of the things that has changed has been the display on almost everything. Anything with a frequency component to it, whether that be a distortion, a filter, EQ, you know, the multiband containers, the DJ EQ, all of these things now feature dynamic displays. And that means both that you're getting visual feedback. So for example, with the E-hat, we can see that a spectrum is popping up and it's showing us what's fitting in each of these categories. But then there's also things that you can control and drag around yourself. So for example, in this case, the level of the low, and then you can also change the cutoff frequency from the display itself. And that's something that we haven't been able to see before and is actually pretty cool. So I'm just going to go through a few examples, some of the more significant updates, in my opinion, the ones that really make a difference to you. And we'll just go through these quickly. Let's start with the E-hat. The E-hat is the sort of instrument where in the past, you've always just kind of had to pull things around to try to get lucky and kind of find a sweet spot. Well, now you can see in this case, frequency is left to right, mix is top to bottom. We can kind of search for something, find what we like, and then adjust feedback. So in this case, that is sounding pretty good to me. We then have the FM hit. Of course, these colors are corresponding. And so with the FM hit, we'll have frequency left to right, mix top to bottom. And again, I already have something dialed in that I kind of like. And then with the hit mod, frequency left to right, and then up and down is going to give you the amount. Plus, we have control over where we're going to put this filter. All right, we can move that high pass filter around. And as you can see, it will only go as far as 831. And in this case, that's kind of where I like it. So with the multiband effects container, this is really cool because in the past, I've always kind of wondered, okay, well, how much overlap is there really? And so with this, you can see that the way the filters are shaped here to cut this off really has to do with whatever the middle of the middle band is set. So you can see that the low is kind of going about to the middle there, and the high is kind of going about to the middle there. And this is very useful, so you can really see just how much you want to include. And I really like that. You can, of course, use your ears, but it's kind of cool to have the display there as well. As far as I know, there's no way to turn off these displays at this point, so that may actually be an annoyance to some of you. But I'm guessing at some point they'll give you a small little button that you could just click if you don't want to get all of that visual feedback. But for now, I kind of like it. All right, over here now to this audio clip. One of the things that, or I should say, one of the devices that's really benefited from a dynamic display is the blur. Always kind of annoying to have to drag these controls individually. Now when you turn this on, let's turn off everything else. I can pull around all of these different comb filters and determine the feedback and the time however I want it to be. So you can now make like fun shapes too, like we could do something like that. Try to even it out a little bit. And as you can tell, I really, really like that. It makes working with this a lot more intuitive, and it makes working with it a lot more fun. You get that instant feedback. You can hear it as you're dragging those around as compared to one control at a time. With the EQ DJ, like with the Multiband FX3, we can see that we get our display with low being red, mid being yellow, and high being blue. And when you turn one of these off, it updates. When you change the value, it also updates. In this case, you can't drag around the frequency, the crossover frequency point, but that's fine. You really don't need to. All right, moving right along with the EQ5. We have the spectrum. That's kind of the big update. That's what people have been expecting, and that's sort of the norm now with most digital audio workstations. I assume at some point they'll also allow you to maybe pop this out and go full screen if you really need fine-tuned control, because as of now, it's still very small. And you see you have different options for the spectrum analyzer. So post is normally the way to go. You can put both on if you want to see what you've done pre and post. But for the most part, you're probably just going to work in post, or if you really hate the analyzer on EQ, you can go none. All right. And last but not least, with the reverb, the whole sort of interface feels like it's changed. This almost feels like a Valhalla reverb with the size of these knobs, which, hey, I'm all in favor for. But you can go in and you can determine the crossover frequency point and then the relative decay time. So we could imagine that this is exactly at 1 second and that this is at 0.5. We get that feedback that, okay, anything that's roughly over 2.37 hertz is going to decay away at half a second. And we could imagine that this is like at 1.5. Anything below 465 is going to decay away at 1.5 seconds, and anything in the middle is going to decay away normally at 1 second. Obviously, it's not as perfect as that, but that's roughly the idea. And last but not least, with your dynamics effects, if this is something you're interested in, you now can use this little red slider to pull down your threshold. I'm so used to just pulling down the threshold that I doubt I'm going to use that, but I know in other digital audio workstations and in other compressors, this is a feature that's there and that people have gotten used to using. So if I try to set this up and just get it to tickle, right, I can use that and set it like so. As far as I can tell, only 2 updates to pre-existing devices, and those 2 devices are the organ and the polysynth. With the organ, the update is very minor. What you have are different blends of harmonics, so kind of like different wave shapes by default. So with Rich, you can see that, let's find one that really locks in here. With Rich, you can see we have something close to like a triangle wave, and then obviously you can build that up. Like so. So for each one that you bring in, it's going to follow that same shape that you see with just one. It's just following the harmonic series up and starting from that point. So you can see that with Rich, this is our starting point. With Pure, this is our starting point, a lot closer to a sine wave, as you can tell. Then we can start to bring in some other things. You can get some really cool wave shapes, very much an additive technique, as I said, and great for making sub-basses and even kind of taking advantage of the missing fundamental principle. If you're not sure what that is, just look it up on Wikipedia. And with the organ, that's something that you can kind of take advantage of if you have, like, smaller speakers, or you want your sub to translate well on, the smaller speakers that are out there. And then last we have full, which is the densest. And you can see what that looks like. So something worth experimenting with. One other thing that's just kind of fun to do is to watch in the spectrum analyzer when you put like the glide on here. This is fun. I don't know why, I just find that to be really exciting. We'll obviously have a more in-depth video on the Polysynth, but you can see right off the bat that it looks very different. You no longer have those built-in LFOs. You're going to have to add them into the modulation section if you need them. You still have your filter envelope generator. You still have your amplitude envelope generator. Those can be mapped to anything inside of the instrument and to any effects that you add in later on. In the oscillators, we now have the ability to control the stereo width of our voices, and then we can also put them somewhere in the stereo field, so we have a panning control. So I could do something like that. This is kind of a cool place to start. We also now have a drive control, pre-filter drive that we can pump in or actually pull away from. We have a high pass filter that can be used, probably useful just to prevent any kind of like artifacts down below. If we bring in the spectrum analyzer, we can see if we have any problems with that right off the bat. Not really, I guess a little bit. So you can get rid of it there. We have a post-filter wave shaper, a lot of different options here. So with all of these additional options, there's so much you can do in terms of new sounds. This is probably the biggest update, almost really for the whole program for version 2, just based on how much more you can get out of the instrument. Personally, I was fine with how the Polysynth was. In the past, I would have preferred an update to the FM4 or to the sampler, but beggars can't be choosers. And last but not least, we have a variety of different oscillator blend modes, and these we will look at again in a dedicated video. But just as an FYI, there is a lot more potential with the Polysynth now than there was in version 1. So last but not least, we have some more features for hardware instrument integration, and specifically for hardware modular synthesizers. There's a lot of options for controlling latency, for syncing MIDI clock, and also for sending control voltage. Now, I don't have a modular synthesizer, and anybody who's gone through the synthesis methods course on Sormena, you probably know my feelings about like buying a modular synth versus what you could be spending your money on otherwise if you want to be like a music producer. But we'll leave that for another time and place. But for now, there are some new features for your hardware instruments, even if you just have something as basic as the base station. Having this latency control that you can manually set will be useful for some instruments. For the base station, I've never had a problem, but for my old Access Virus, I sometimes do have issues because I'm sending MIDI through like 2 or 3 different places. Like it has to go a long way. And so there can be a problem with latency. I also imagine, though, that real-time bouncing might solve that. So if I don't have to touch latency settings on my own, I prefer not to do it. You can try to set it automatically by pinging, but I don't really know how this works because when you click it, it seems to change every time. Like the value will change. So I'm just going to leave that alone as of right now. But setting up your hardware instrument is exactly the same. You choose the MIDI source, and then you go in here and you pick the channel that it's on or however you've named your stuff. All right, you can turn on the MIDI clock sync, and remember that there are some other MIDI options here in synchronization that I'm not really going to be getting into. The other things that have changed that you have here are Midi CC And so this is kind of interesting. It doesn't really work all the way. Some things will work. So for example, if I want to change the volume, I know that that's attached to number 7. You can hear now it's silent. But 105, let's just choose this one. 105 is supposed to be filter frequency cutoff. But it doesn't adjust that. In fact, what it's adjusting, I have to look at my instrument to see this. I think what it adjusts is, in this case, it's not doing anything. Let's try 104. 106, that's the one. 106 will change the slope type on the filter, but for some reason the cutoff doesn't work, and that's like one of the major ones that you'd want to have control over. So not sure if that's a problem with the base station, not sure if that's a problem with the Midi CC, but for your own instruments, you can always go online and search your instrument followed by Midi CC, and you'll get a list of the numbers that correspond to parameters on that instrument. I haven't had a whole lot of success with this one, so I'm probably not really going to use it that much. The one MIDI effect that I am really happy with is the program change, especially for hardware instruments. You don't always want to try to go up and click around. So here, you can jump through your presets very easily. And I'd imagine that this would also work with software synthesizers, so things that have a lot of banks you could go through and flip through presets. With software synths, I don't know if it's easier to just do that manually, especially if there's something you're looking for, but this one's pretty cool. There's also a Midi Song Select option that you can bring in. For this instrument, it's not going to make any difference, but as the website says, if you have a drum machine that has a bunch of different like pattern selects, that would be something that you would use to flip through there. Worth noting that with the program change, you can automate this. All right, so let's just like record in a clip here. Is I can go in and I can choose here program, and that's going to pop up. And now for this second half, I can go ahead and I can make a little bit of an adjustment. There'll be an anti-click that you can add in, but if you get your timing just right, you may not need it. We'll hear if there's a problem. All right, let's test this out. So there was a little bit of a click there. If I zoom way in, but what I could do is try and use the shift key, get right up in there, and I'd also probably go in and edit where this is occurring. Where is this occurring? Somewhere between in the 4 range. I can just take this one, bring it back a little bit so that I have a little more of a gap to work with. All right, so now let's test it out. It wasn't like the greatest of presets. That one's also pretty boring, but hey, you get the idea. That's how it works, and that's going to wrap it up for what is new in Bitwig Studio version 2.0. Thanks for watching.